My daddy first met my mom when he burst through the door of what he thought was his father's office, only to meet, and I'm going to quote him on this, he saw the most beautiful woman with the most beautiful blonde hair he had ever seen in his life. My dad had just come back from World War II. 6 months later, my daddy married his father's secretary. 1 year and 1 day later, my brother Donnie was born, and 2 years and 3 months later, I was born. My daddy worked 7 years without a vacation and never used 1 day of his sick leave. So one day after work, after my brother and I had gotten out of school for the summer, my daddy came home driving a brand new 1956 green and white Oldsmobile station wagon with a 4-speed automatic Jetway hydromatic transmission. That was the first new car my daddy had ever bought. He then announced to the entire family that we were about to go on a 4-week vacation to the West. With all this information, my little 7-year-old brain exploded. Now, my daddy had a great idea for us. He decided that we would practice loading and unloading the station wagon and setting up our campsite in our front yard. Now, I know some of our neighbors thought we were crazy, but you know, what are you going to do? We each had jobs. My dad had the cooler and the cots and the folding table and anything that was heavy. My mom had the stove and the pots and pans and all the cleaning stuff. My brother and I, Donnie and I, had the tent, sleeping bags, pillows, and we each had our own bag with clothes and our private toiletries. The next bright idea my dad got, since he was a first sergeant in the Army, he thought it would be great if we timed to see how fast we could break down the camp and load it in the station wagon. Okay? And he had a stopwatch. Of course he had a stopwatch. Our best record was 7 minutes and 43 seconds. Now, we only broke that one time. And that was one evening in Arizona, right before we were about to go to bed, when the sky opened up and started raining. And I'm talking dogs and cat kind of rain, okay? So we think we loaded that station wagon in under 4 minutes. And that included my dad throwing me and Donnie in the back on top of all the soaked stuff. He drove straight to a motor lodge. We checked in. Mom made my brother and I have a warm bath, and then she put us in bed. On our way to Mesa Verde, we stopped at a trading post. My brother and I got to meet 2 men who belonged to the Navajo tribe. And we talked to these 2 men for quite a long time. We went to the Hoover Dam. Immediately, my brother and I went over and spit right off the top all the way down to the bottom. This did not please my mom very much. And I thought when we were leaving the new Hoover Dam, that big dam was named after a vacuum cleaner company. Right after Yellowstone, we drove a little bit east and then started down south back to our house. Driving through Colorado on our way to see Pikes Peak. I had wanted to go to Pikes Peak ever since I'd read about it. Pikes Peak, you ready for this? 14,115 feet above sea level. It's one of 53 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado. We drove by many of them on our way to Colorado Springs. From the base of Pikes Peak to the peak is 19 miles. That's a lot of information to remember. As we started up that mountain, my dad was just laid back. We had all day to see Pikes Peak. So we slowly drove up Pikes Peak. I was watching my mom and she kept looking out the window and she'd kind of clear her throat and she'd look out the window and clear her throat again. She finally said, "Don, there's no guardrail down there and this mountain is going way down." My dad said, "Lee, it's all right. No, don't worry yourself." We drove for about 5 more minutes and my mom looked back out the window and said, "You know, it's getting further and further down there and there's still no guardrail there." My dad said, "Lee, it's all right. Just calm down." I climbed over my brother to look out to see what my mom was talking about. My brother hit me. We started having a fight in the back seat. My mom said, "Boys, boys, boys, behave, behave." I got an idea. Why don't you start telling me what your favorite thing about this trip has been? So as Mom distracted us from having a fight, I think the bigger reason was Mom was distracting herself from looking out that window because she was scared to death of heights. Well, we talked and we laughed and we told about our favorite things, and lo and behold, we were at the top of the mountain, in the parking lot, at the top of Pikes Peak. Well, I got out of the car, and I stood there and I screamed, 14,115 feet above sea level. And guess what? It felt just like when I was down at the bottom of Pikes Peak. Except one thing, there was snow. My brother and I ran for snow. You gotta understand, we're from Texas. We didn't know what this stuff was. We ran, started throwing snowballs at each other, hitting each other in the face until our hands were frozen. We did everything in this mountain. We rode the mules that were pulling the carts on the tracks out of the mines that used to be used for when there were mines up on that peak. We went to the petting zoo, petted all these animals, and then we went to the centerpiece of the top of Pikes Peak, Santa's workshop. Yes, Santa's workshop. This is the first time I had ever seen Santa in the middle of summer. It took my mom and dad probably an hour to get us rounded up and back into the car to go down Pikes Peak so we could go back to our campground. So we got in the car, we start back down. My brother and I were fooling around the back seat, you know, probably pulling snow out of our pockets and throwing it at each other. And all of a sudden, there came a voice from the front seat that said, "Boys, shut up." Now this was very unusual because this was my mom's voice and this was not my mom's expression. We had never ever heard my mom say that word. It was my dad's favorite expression. So I realized, I looked around, started looking at what the scenery going by, and we seemed to be going pretty fast down the hill since we'd come up very slow. It just seemed a little weird. Then I thought, oh yeah, yesterday Dad caught some trout, and he's looking forward to going down and cooking those trout tonight and having for dinner because it's his favorite meal. Well, we kept going down and kept going down, and we got a little faster, and it was jerky, and I looked over to my brother, and my brother was looking straight forward. And so I looked outside, and we were going a little faster and a little faster, and then I looked up at my mom. My mom was leaning forward, and her hands were right on the dashboard, and she was looking straight forward, not moving. I looked at my dad, and my dad was kind of moving and jerking around. I was having a hard time because I was sitting right behind him, and he usually was very, very calm and still when he was driving. Looked out again, we were moving faster and jerking and stopping and slowing down and speeding down, and it just kept going and going and going. And I realized at one point in time that it felt like that all the air in the car had been sucked out of the car. So we plummeted down this mountain faster and faster and faster. Finally, we got down to the bottom, and my dad pulled over the side of the road, and we glided, barely glided, until we stopped. My dad flung open the door. He ran to the front of the car, hit the front of the car with his hands, and he said the words that my brother and I were not allowed to say. He quickly came to the passenger side, opened the door, pulled my mom out, threw his arms around her. And that's when I realized something was different. I looked over at my brother, and Donnie just shrugged his shoulders and like, I don't know. And we looked back, and my mom's hair was as white as the snow on top of that mountain. Later, we were told that the brakes had gone out when we were coming down the mountain, and my dad had ridden the emergency brake all the way down to get us down. I've thought about this incident a lot over the years. There's several observations I have about it. I am so glad as a 7-year-old that I had no idea what was going on. My brother, who was 9, I've talked to him later, and he said, yes, he knew what was going on. My dad was a hero that day. He stayed calm. He hugged the side of the mountain that we couldn't fall off. He rode that emergency brake down. He got us down. But my mom also had an important role in this, getting us down to the bottom. She gripped that dashboard and dug her fingerprints into that dashboard. And with her sheer will, she willed us down that mountain. Now, with everything that's good happens, there's a price to pay. My dad never bought another Oldsmobile the rest of his life. My dad didn't even buy another car with an automatic transmission. And my mom, my beautiful 32-year-old mom, had white hair from that day to the day she died.